The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
we are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Tuesday, May 2nd, 2017. Thanks so much for joining us. There's a lot to cover tonight, a lot of stories happening that we need to discuss, and I want you to weigh in on the discussion, 857-600-0518, to let us know what you think about any of the stories. As always, I'd like to start by thanking the supporters of the show, all of our patrons. Thank you so much for all of your continued support. Without you, we cannot do this. We are genuinely sponsored by you, the listener, and we can't do it without you. So consider becoming a patron. We recorded, I don't know if I want to blame it on our bonus show, but we did do about a 20-minute bonus show for you all that we'll have uploaded immediately after tonight's show. So if you want to get that bonus content, we're talking about men's rights activists. And my captain, well, not my captain anymore, William Shatner, being a men's rights activist. We talked about it for about 20 minutes and a lot of different nuances and arguments in there. So it's a really great episode. Consider becoming a patron. To get access to it, go to patreon.com/the BPD show to get access to all of our bonus content, previous and present. All right, let's jump into the stories. There's a lot of news. The saying, when it rains, it pours, is so true. And it seems as though whenever an issue of police violence, police brutality hits, it all hits at the same time. And this is especially true this week with the killing of Jordan Edwards, the case with Michael Slager and Walter Scott, and Alton Sterling, all hitting important milestones, I guess you could say, today. And I want to start with Walter Scott and the police officer who shot and killed him as he ran away from the police officer. Michael Slager pled guilty today in order to avoid murder charges. Michael Slager pled guilty in federal court. He pled guilty to using excessive force and depriving Mr. Scott of his civil rights. So underneath this deal, Slager, the federal and state officials will not pursue any other charges on the federal or state level. So he's not going to be charged with murder. The charge which, and this is according to New York Times, the charge which Mr. Slager pleaded guilty to carries a maximum of life in prison. So there's a possibility that he will have a lengthy sentence, but it's ultimately in the hands of the judge now. Now that he's pled guilty, we would have to see the type of penalty that he actually gets. And this is where it really matters. Him pleading guilty, it's clearly in exchange for shortened time. I doubt very seriously that Michael Slager is going to get a life sentence. But what he gets really will signal to the nation how serious the Justice Department and the state level is taking this case. Now, before I go into any more of the details about this plea deal, you will remember there was a hung jury on the last go round. He took his chances on the state level, and there was one gentleman, a white juror, who said that he could not bring himself to find Mr. Slager, Officer Slager, guilty. This is despite the video. This is despite us seeing Walter Scott fleeing and Michael Slager shooting him in the back, killing him. On top of that, we saw in the same video Michael Slager planting evidence. So despite the clear-cut video evidence, we still could not get a conviction. And I guess his lawyers talked some sense into him, saying that you're not going to get this lucky the second time around. And because of that, he is pleaded guilty. But it still speaks to the reality that police officers' behaviors have not changed in this video ubiquitous society, social media society. They haven't even changed with body cameras, knowing full and well that the world is going to see their actions. We've seen time and time and again that video cameras, cell phones, social media exposure, nor body cams have the effect of changing this type of behavior where we see police officers killing people, unarmed, killing men, black men, killing just abuse. And we can't get a conviction. Well, in this case, we pled guilty, and under federal sentencing guidelines, it's very possible that he's going to serve far less time than a life sentence. In a statement, his defense attorney says that we hope Michael's acceptance of responsibility will help the Scott family as they continue to grieve their loss. A spokesperson for the families representing Walter Scott's family said that he could not comment at this time, so we don't have any official comment from the Scott family. But here we are. Here we are at the end of this particular instance. And as we come to the end of this particular instance, we still have to report on the execution. And execution probably is too harsh, but what the hell, whatever. The murder of Jordan Edwards. Jordan Edwards, 15-year-old student, honor student. Now, I'm going to describe Jordan Edwards as he was described to me, as he was described to everyone else. And the reason I'm setting it up this way is because it's important that we do not use the fact that he was an honor student as a reason to argue against what happened to him. Because even if he was not an honor student, and he did not deserve to be killed by this police officer. As they were reversing the car, trying to avoid danger, they were trying to flee danger, and as they fled danger, he was shot and killed by a police officer. And before I go any further, just prior to the show, we found out that the officer has been fired and possibly facing charges. And again, we've seen this before. What matters is, can we get a conviction? And without convictions, without a jury saying that we find this police officer guilty, we will not see a change in the culture or the climate that fosters this. So to come back full circle to the top, Jordan Edwards, an honor student. He didn't have to be an honor student, but he was. He was loved by his school, by his classmates, and most of all by his family. Shot and killed as he tried to flee violence that was happening at some party. He was trying to leave. In the report with Jordan Edwards, this is the part that jumps out to me the most, is that with Jordan Edwards, the report said that the police report rather, said that the vehicle was coming towards the officer. Now, this is despite the fact that the officer was wearing a damn body camera. He had on a body camera, yet he felt comfortable enough falsifying a report. Instead of the car coming towards the officer, the body cam shows that the car was going the opposite direction, trying to get away from that scene. And so the people in the vehicle posed no threat whatsoever. As a result, this officer has been fired, but not yet arrested. It is very possible that he's going to face charges. Here's a quote that I want to read. That he said, "I unintentionally and incorrectly said the vehicle was backing down the road." This is according to the officer who made I guess we can explain away everything, right? I guess we can apologize and just, but how do you get that detail wrong? How do you, as a police officer, get that detail wrong? This is not, you don't misremember these types of important details, but yet this is something that is being allowed, or at least has been floated and reported by ABC News. So the officer has been fired. We're waiting for him to be arrested. The family is waiting for him to be arrested. The family has asked that. And this is one part of the story that bothers me, that they even have to ask this, but they have asked that everyone is respectful at this time. Obviously, that's important, but also that no one makes any types of threats against the police department. I feel that the family should not have to ask that. not because of the potential of violence, but because that is not a burden that this family should bear. They have chosen to bear it, and that's their business, and not putting any type of judgment against the family. But this is the type of situation we're faced with, right? They are grieving the loss of their son, the murder of their son, and the political nature of Black lives and police violence at this time requires that the family have to issue a statement denouncing any type of violence or denouncing any type of threats against the police department. They're mourning the loss of their son. They should not have to be held accountable or say anything in that regard whatsoever, and they should not have to. And this is the fascinating twist. If I could just sidestep the story a little bit, this is amazing to me that in the United States of America, the victim's family has to be the responsible one, has to be the one to come out and say these politically accurate, I won't even say politically correct, but politically accurate statements. I get it. I get the necessity why they felt like they had to do it. But in the same exact climate, you'll get a statement from a police union, not in this specific case, but in so many cases, the victim's family has to bear the burden of maintaining peace and order and decorum while the policing agencies are allowed to do whatever the hell they want to do. So that's something that bothers me. But and this family has so graciously stepped up to the challenge, right? They've stepped up to it, and they're in the spotlight, and they're owning this, and they're living up to this responsibility that I feel should not be their responsibility. The only thing that this family should have to worry about at this time is grieving the loss of their 15-year-old son and brother. Here's a statement from the family with regard to the termination of the officer. They said, "We are grateful for the decision. The decision has been made to terminate the officer responsible for Jordan's murder. Over the past 24 hours, Chief Haber has made commendable strides towards justice. However, there remains a long road ahead. We anxiously await this officer's identification and arrest for the crime of murder. The magnitude of his horrible actions cannot be overstated. We fully expect an equivalent response from those responsible for investigating and punishing the crime." And so this is where we are. Another family is grieving the loss of their son because of the overzealous, and that's putting it lightly, that's being gracious, the overzealous actions of a police officer who saw a car full of young Black kids and felt that it was necessary to defend himself from a vehicle that was going the opposite direction from him. And yet, in reporting it, in filing the police report, he said the vehicle was coming towards him. And this was co-signed by the chief of police, Chief Haber. So we'll obviously be following this story. I mean, there's so many different things inside of that story that deserve discussion and commentary and getting your feedback. But for right now, we'll leave the story there, and we'll come back to it as we get more information. Another story in the same light, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Alton Sterling. Alton Sterling, you'll remember, most of us had the unfortunate opportunity to see this man die at the hands of two police officers. The police officers wrestled him to the ground, and they yelled "gun," and then they shot and killed Alton Sterling. You also would remember his son on the news immediately after, crying for his father. Today, the Justice Department said that it will not bring charges against the officers involved in this case. The Justice Department, according to NBC, does not plan to bring any charges for this case in Baton Rouge. They said that prosecutors have concluded that there is not enough evidence to bring civil rights charges on the police officers who killed 37-year-old Alton Sterling back in July of 2016. This is not a surprise. This is not a surprise. This is not surprising. Some people that I know that are connected to this investigation, sent me this information, and I didn't even respond. I'm not shocked, because we've seen time and time and again the hurdle for civil rights violations. It's a high hurdle, and that's me being gracious, right? But we see time and time again that the Justice Department, the federal Justice Department, is incapable of making cases against police officers. The hurdle is so high that it's insurmountable. The hurdle is so high that time and time again, no matter what we see on a video, we find that police officers are not held accountable by our Justice Department. And this is not a problem that is now something that we can lay at the feet of Trump's Justice Department. This is a problem that exists in the Justice Department in general. They could not find anything to charge Darren Wilson. They could not find any civil rights violations in the murder of Michael Brown. And they could not find it in case after case after case. They can never find the Justice Department find anything to bring charges up against these police officers. And so here we are with Walter Scott, not Walter. See, and there's so many names. And this is something like I could not go back and give you the names of everyone that I've reported on who's been killed by police officers in the short 2 years that I've been doing this show. I can only give you the names that stand out, the people that I remember, like my friend Corey Jones, who was killed. You know, it happens so frequently. You have to ask yourself the question, is it happening more now, or are we just more aware of it now because of the ubiquitousness of video cameras on cell phones? And the truth of the matter is, as we, I guess, commemorate the LA riots in 1992, there was as a result of the Rodney King beating video and the subsequent acquittal. I think the reality of it is that this level of violence against minority communities, particularly impoverished minority communities, has always existed, and we're just seeing it more frequently at this point. And in the case of Alton Sterling, the officers will not be charged by the Justice Department. 857-600-0518 if you want to weigh in on the discussion. What do you think? What are your thoughts on all these cases? I mean, this is enough for us to take a pause and get some feedback from you, because there are three major cases that that take its toll on you, right? It really weighs you down when you consider the frequency, not only the frequency, but the reality that we still haven't had justice in almost a single damn case. Name me a case that we've had justice in. I mean, I would be surprised. We've gone over so many. Perhaps the case out of Oklahoma, where the gentleman was run down by undercover police officers, and then a volunteer police officer, elderly man, shot and killed him. And I honestly, at the top of my tongue, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but I do know in that case that the gentleman, the volunteer police officer, was found guilty. That's one case. And keep in mind, in that case, if you remember, he was just one of the people on the scene who was involved in this murder. But can we see any trend whatsoever in terms of changing the behavior of police officers? And that's the thing that matters the most, is that, you know, we could keep going through this. We could keep even if we get individual examples of someone being held accountable, we do not have enough police officers being held accountable to actually change the behavior pattern of this aggressive position towards minority communities in general, but particularly impoverished minority communities. What are your thoughts? Let's take this first caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Oh, hey, Ben, it's me, Jared, from down in town, PA. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jared. How's it going?
Pretty good. The phone system was kind of screwed up at first, but now it's working again. It's the whole police situation in this country. I mean, we have to remember that policing was originally set up to enforce slavery, basically. So it, by definition, has its roots in a white supremacist ideology. Mm-hmm. And in fact, our country was literally founded by white supremacy.
Absolutely.
And if you look at our foreign policy, take our foreign policy and take our domestic policy, we are a culture of death, basically. We have the highest guns for any country on the planet. I think the only country that comes close is Yemen or something. it's like per capita gun ownership. They go around and bomb, kill, murder people around the world. And those presidents never get held accountable for that.
Yeah.
Like, so it's kind of, for the police officers, they say, well, if they can do that to, basically all these brown people over there, why can't I do it over here? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's something about the culture in America that just glorifies violence. Like, if you go on TV, it's like everything is just, shooting, murder, just all the shows that are like the top-rated shows, all about like murder and death.
Right.
But not sex, though, of course, because sex, we're a puritanical society, so we can't have anything about sex. I don't know. I just think a lot of it has to do.
All right, Jared. Thanks. Jared, I'm gonna have to cut you there only because it's getting harder and harder to hear you. I want to make sure the audience can hear the callers good. 857-600-0518. But if I got the gist of what you were saying, empire without creates injustices within, I think is a saying, and I'm not quite sure who to credit with that. But exactly, I mean, and this is true, right? So I don't want to. We have to be able to simultaneously look at the macro and the micro level. If I could steal from economics, right? On the macro level, on the international level, we should look at a broader analysis and consider the implications of our activities abroad that cause that fund, literally, like some of the military equipment that these policing agencies have came directly from the military industrial complex, which is there for no other reason than to expand our empire abroad, right? And so we should look at the systemic level forces that are involved, but also let's not neglect the micro level, right? The individual family, the community, and the overall domestic issue here in the United States that black and brown people are being killed. Listen, and we could broaden it. I have absolutely no problem broadening it because the data says so, right? Police officers kill people in general. But there is a concentration that happens, and a disproportionate concentration that happens in black communities. And that concentration is even more focused in poor communities. The behavior of police departments in wealthy communities is not the same as the behavior of police departments in poor, impoverished communities. This is an objective reality, an objective truth. The police departments in wealthy communities do not remotely behave with the aggressive posture towards the community as police officers in impoverished communities. And so it's important for us to look at this as all the levels. One, to give respect and proper deference to the family that's going through it right now. And then look at it at a systemic level. And then look at it at a systemic level on how we can change it so that there's not the next family. And one of the problems involved in this is that we do not see enough penalties. We don't see juries finding police officers guilty. And without juries finding police officers guilty, we're never going to see a change in the behavior. Now, that's just one level. We also do not see police agencies, police unions, chiefs of police, or the mayors demanding that the community or the way the police officers are postured towards the community change, that the police culture changes. It has to come from the top down. All right, let's take some comments. We have some comments here from the comment section. The first one is from YouTube, from Coffrin. He said, from outside the U.S. often looks like this weird backward country where killers are called cops. And I would just go one step further. They're not only called cops, but they're called heroes. Right? They are called heroes because the narrative that is always woven around these incidents is that the police officer had no choice but to do the heroic thing and to stand against this, or to put down this barbaric person. And this is why it's important now that we don't always lift up the noble nature of the ones that were killed as a justification as to why they should not have been killed. Because even if they were someone who was violent, or they were someone with a record, for example, then if that person was not an immediate threat to that police officer, they should not be shot. And so I don't care what you pull up. Like for instance, I keep mentioning my friend Corey Jones because he had a spotless record. He had a spotless record, and yet he was still killed. But you know what? Even if he had a criminal record, on the night in question that he was killed, he did not pose a threat to that officer. And I don't care if he had a rap sheet as long as anyone else's. He still did not deserve to die. And so I bring up the fact that Jordan was an honor student. I bring up the fact that all these things that are noble about him, because this is just who he was. And this is how America, this is how his family wants him to be remembered. And this is how America is remembering him, right? But then even still, underneath that, we need to realize that whether they were an honor student or whether they were a dropout, the police officers have a disposition towards minority communities, particularly impoverished minority communities, that is so aggressive that it doesn't matter whether you're an honor student or you're a dropout, you stand a chance of being killed. 857-600-0518. Let's take a couple other comments from our comment section. This is from Desiree from Facebook. She says, right, the cops being required to wear cameras brings evidence of police brutality. And it does. But Desiree, the thing that really trips me out about this is that it does not change their behavior. If you know you're wearing a body camera and you know that you're falsifying a report, and what you're falsifying is going to be contradicted by your body camera, that suggests that you think that you could get away with it despite the body camera. And this is the most fascinating phenomenon, is that we see body cameras are not changing behavior patterns. And the only thing I think that's going to change behavior patterns is when you see police officers being arrested, charged, and convicted, and sitting in jail. That's the only thing that we're going to see that's going to change this behavior pattern. Let's take this other comment from YouTube. Not sure what XYB is the name. We'll call it XYB. It says, imagine what a world it would be if cops were held to the same standards as the people they murder. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and there's actually a technical scale that they use to consider whether or not the use of force was proper. And it's a scale that says if an individual does X, then the officer is authorized to do X plus 1 in terms of their response. If the individual uses fights, or if they use their fist, then the officer, for example, can use their billy club. We don't see that anymore. They go straight to the taser. But that scale oftentimes gives the benefit of the doubt to the police officer in such a significant fashion that they're technically able to get away with murder. All right, let's see, a couple of other, all right. So yeah, I still want to get your feedback. I don't want to move too quickly. I have a tendency to move really quickly off of these stories only because there's so much happening in the news, but I just want to give time for your voice to be heard. Let's take a listen to a caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, how's it going? Daniel from Hawaii. One thing I wanted to say is check out Colony in a Nation. I had it on an audio book by Chris Hayes, and I'll give you a really, really, really good understanding of why things are the way they are. And also, too, I wanted to say about, the whole class dynamic, this whole thing with, racism was a tool for the elite to be able to divide and conquer the lower classes so that they can't band together and do anything to change their power structures.
Yeah.
And, even though it's morphed into a lot more, and there's, by no means does that mean that racism in itself isn't horrible itself, but you got to understand that it's also a tool.
Yeah.
And you got to understand these things. So, I do understand what Bernie's doing with this unity tour. I think it's fucking dumb the way he's trying to do it, but the concept behind it, I think, is more or less to ban all of the minority groups together rather than necessarily ban, to ban all the minority and lower class groups together against the higher class.
Yeah.
Because that's what it really is a class system in this state, in this country, in this talk that I hear with people like, we need to get our democracy back. Well, actually, if you really look at American history, we've never actually had a democracy. We've only ever had a plutocracy, and we've only ever had the elite to push around and push their agenda.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's what I want to put out right now.
Thanks for the call, Daniel. And again, yeah, this ties back to what level of analysis. And I think it's important. I want to reiterate this. It's important for me. And I hope that you take this on your own. You take this as a challenge for you. But it's important for me to have the ability to have a multi-level analysis, to look at it at a systemic level and see the connections that it has with our empire, with our global hegemony, whatever you want to call it, with our military industrial complex, with capitalism, right? We must be able to look at it from a macro international level, but we also need to be able to simultaneously discuss the individual level. And not just the individual level of individual examples of racism, but the smaller, the closer systemic level, the systemic problems in a particular police department, right? Not every police department operates the same way. So the systemic problem in Baton Rouge is probably uniquely different than the systemic problem we saw in Ferguson. They probably have some similarities, but it's important that we are able to critique the system both on the local level as well as the global level. And in this case, what the caller is saying is that you absolutely have to tie it back to the means, the reason, and the way that racism was used for the advancement of capitalism. I think that's important. And I think we've discussed it. But it's also important for us to realize that this was a young black man who was killed. I don't know. We don't even know who the officer is. We don't know his race. Could have been it could have been a black guy for all we know. But we do know the role of the policing agencies in our country and the role that they have played historically and the role and the position and the posture that they have towards minorities, particularly African Americans, black Americans, and particularly black Americans in poverty. All right, let's take this other comment coming up on our screen here. I want your feedback. This is from Susan on Twitter. You are right about everything, but with the current culture in America, things will get much worse. I want to naively disagree with you. I'm going to say naively disagree with you because I just want to speak positive things into the atmosphere. It's got to get better. It's got to get better, and it's up to us to do our part to make it get better. And so I'm going to naively disagree with you, and you can read into that response any way that you want. Any more? All right. So when it rains, it pours. Here in Boston, last night, Adam Jones of the Orioles said, was that Baltimore Orioles? Yeah, I don't follow baseball too much, but I knew Baltimore. Said that during the game, he was called the N-word a couple of times by a fan who threw a bag of peanuts at him. Jones said, quote, a disrespectful fan threw a bag of peanuts at me. I was called the N-word a handful of times. Thanks, pretty awesome. Very unfortunate. I heard it was 59 or 60 ejections tonight in the ballpark. It is what it is, right? This is his quote. I'm going to continue to read. He said, I just go out and play baseball. It's unfortunate that people need to report those types of epithets to degrade another human being. I am trying to make a living for myself and my family. And he went on to say, again, it's unfortunate. The best thing about myself is that I can continue to move on and still play the game hard. Let people be who they are. Let them show their true colors. I actually like his second press conference response. And they said, what do you want to say to the fan? He said, the fan that called you the N-word. He said, well, I mean, come on, let's square up. Let's just fight and be over and be through with it. That's my kind of response. Like, you really mean what you say, you know. But anyway, we're leftists. We're supposed to be peaceful. Anyway, I digress. This really goes to Michael Shea, the comedian from Saturday Night Live. He spoke about how racist Boston was. And I intentionally avoided that conversation because I got to live here, man. I got to freaking live here. But Boston, man, Boston is a rough ass city. It is tough. It is not a liberal bastion by any means. Even if it was a liberal bastion, you're still going to find racism in liberal cities. But Boston is a very, very staunchly conservative city. Case in point, You're watching me on the internet talk about progressive politics from Boston, but there's not a single terrestrial radio, regular radio station that has liberal commentary, progressive commentary. It is all right-wing, far right-wing conservative commentary. Now, care what anybody says, and we can debate this, and if somebody disagrees with this, please call in so we can debate this. Where you find a lot of conservatism, you're going to find a lot of overt racism. You're going to find racism with liberals, no questions asked. You're going to find it. But this overt, palatable, visceral racism, you're going to find it in these types of communities. And this is what you have in Boston. I can give you examples of the tensions, just the feeling of threats over my life here in Boston that I did not ever experience in Mississippi. I lived in Mississippi when I was a young man, young kid, till I was in high school, but I never felt my life threatened. I lived in Florida. First time I ever got called the N-word was Florida, not Mississippi, South Florida, but I never felt my life was threatened. I felt my life was threatened for racial reasons here in New England, not Boston particularly, Providence, but New England is a tough town, and a lot of people excuse it and say, oh, it's a liberal. No, you have a lot of liberal politics in different pockets in different areas, but it's a tough city. And even if it was, I could care less, even if it was 100% liberal, there's a lot of racists up here. And I usually don't talk about it because, as soon as we get out of here, I got to walk through the city. and I just, it is what it is. But the reality of it is that this type of behavior pattern, it's fascinating that you see it in sports, but you see it when people become angry and frustrated. We saw this in Boston at the hockey game like 2 years ago. There was a visiting team where the Boston Brewers, lost because of a black player. And they didn't just say it at the game, but all over Twitter, they were using racial slurs towards this black player who beat the Bruins on that night. Now, we could take this and broaden this out from Boston because it's not just Boston. It's probably damn near every city that you go to. If you are playing a sports game and you happen to be black or Hispanic or something other than the cultural norm is the white starting base default position, and you beat somebody in a sporting event, it's possible you're going to get called a racial epithet. And that's because human nature, man, when somebody's pissed, human nature, they try to cut down, they try to hit you at the place that they think they can hurt you the most. And when we see this time and time again, another example that I would tie into this is American University. American University just elected their first African-American Student Government Association president. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And as a result of this being the first African-American SGA president, someone didn't like it. And so what they did was they took 3 bananas and on the bananas, they wrote AKA for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so this was their way of showing that they were angry because a black person was elected to be the SGA president. We've never been a post-racial society. We've never been a post-racial country. Never. Then this idea that we were able to elect a black president suggests that we've gotten beyond race. Have we made progress? Sure. Okay, fine. We've made progress. But whenever people's human nature, and we could just, again, systemic versus individual, human nature on the individual level, people are going to always default to the most insulting thing they can whenever they are upset with an individual. And if it's race, it's race. But then on the systemic level, we're still very much so far from being a post-racial society. And we can see case after case after case after case. It's proven. We've got so far to go. Let's take a look at these comments. And 857-600-0518 if you want to weigh in. A couple more comments from our audience on YouTube. Deny said, not only police, but how do we hold prosecutors who fail to prosecute accountable? Absolutely great question. Thank you so much, Denis, for bringing that out, because it's not only the police department. It is also these prosecutors who fail. And it's also, take a look at Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, right? She went after the police for killing, goodness, so many names. But she did her job as a prosecutor. And because she did her job as a prosecutor, they came after her. Well, likewise, we need to be willing and able to go after these prosecutors who, like in Ferguson, are in league with the police departments. See, it's not just that they can't find evidence. You have to understand, these prosecutors have long-standing relationships with the police departments. They are their colleagues. They work in tandem together. They work on issue after issue after issue together. So we should always, in many cases, we should demand a special prosecutor, because how can you expect someone who has to work with the police department day in and day out to effectively investigate people that they consider friends? So not only do we need to politically go after these people when they don't do their job, we need to structurally change this so that if someone is being charged from within the justice apparatus in a city, that there's a special prosecutor who's brought in who has no connection to the city. All right, a couple more comments and then we'll move to the next story. This is a comment from Facebook. It's a good one. Let's see. Daniel says, it seems like we need a police review board and any sort of misconduct. There's a full investigation, minors, but it's really small here. But there has to be a full investigation of this police officer's behavior. If this is an irregular occurrence, then there should be, we're gonna have to, let's skip that one. I'm sorry, Daniel. We try not to edit your comments. To be fair, we try not to edit them. We try to just bring them in, but we may have to start editing some comments. All right, this is from Old Maryland on YouTube. She said, there used to be this part of Boston called the combat zone. Even the police didn't go there. Yeah, I haven't heard of the combat zone, but there's some neighborhoods where I get off a train and I realize if it's a certain time of night, I didn't need to get my ass right back on the train and go home. And I'm a grown ass man. 857-600-0518. All right, let's shift gears and talk about a couple of the stories while we have time. So I didn't want to talk about this yesterday, Donald Trump and the Civil War comment. Let me start why I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about Donald Trump's Civil War comment because, one, everybody and their mom is going to talk about it, and they have talked. Everybody's, because it's easy. It's easy clicks. I probably could have got 100,000 clicks if I published this yesterday. And sometimes I just don't feel like doing what everybody else does. But then two, like how many absurd things can Donald Trump say and we respond to it? Like I get whiplash. If I would have whiplash if I responded to everything Donald Trump says that is absurd. But number three, the third reason that I didn't want to talk about it is because, actually, no, I'll stop at two. Here's why I decided to talk about it. Because when I consider, so let me, if you don't know the story, let me give you a little bit of background. So Donald Trump was asked about the Civil War in an interview, and he brought up Andrew Jackson, and he said that if Andrew Jackson had been around, it's possible that the Civil War would not have happened. He was 16 years off. Andrew Jackson died 16 years before the Civil War. And everybody's harping on the lack of knowledge of Donald Trump. I mean, I can't really get frustrated with that anymore because he's demonstrated that he's completely devoid of any substance. So it's not just the fact that he's historically wrong that as far as why I want to talk about this. But here's why I want to talk about it. He's really arguing for Andrew Jackson to be the individual in history. Had he been around, he would have been the individual in history who could have prevented the Civil War. Now, Andrew Jackson owned about 150 slaves. Andrew Jackson, for lack of a better phrase, led the Trail of Tears, instituted the Trail of Tears, killing millions of Native Americans. When Donald Trump makes a comment like this, the only thing that really stands out to me is how does he think Andrew Jackson would have avoided the Civil War? To me, that's the only thing that matters. How? By not ending slavery? Because you cannot take and venerate an individual like Andrew Jackson and actually believe for one hot damn second that he would have ended slavery or that he would have set the ball in motion to end slavery. And so for Donald Trump to say that Andrew Jackson would have helped us to avoid the Civil War, what would have been the end result is the actual thing that matters the most. This is the follow-up question that reporter should have asked. If you think Andrew Jackson was going to keep us from going to civil war, then do you think he would have ended slavery? Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, would probably have said yes. Then explain to us, Donald Trump, if yes, explain to us how a man who owned 150 slaves, a man who had no regard for African Americans or any minority at that time, the man who is trying to do it without cussing, but is a stain on American history above and beyond all of the other stains on American history. How do you logically suggest that he would have ended slavery? He would have avoided the Civil War and ended slavery. He could not justify that. He could not argue that. It doesn't make sense. So to me, Donald Trump, in his mind, if you actually want to go down and follow his mind, down the rabbit hole of his mind, Donald Trump is saying that we could have avoided the Civil War with Andrew Jackson at the cost of maintaining the slave economic system. Why does that matter? Well, besides the obvious, it also matters because it shines a light on Donald Trump's willingness to allow systems, atrocities to take place for the sake of negotiating a deal. I want to put this in context of the people that he's actually talking to on the international stage now, right? Now, before I even go down this train of thought, let me put this caveat here. Number one, America has always had relationships with dictators. America has always had relationships with murderous dictators. America has always had relationships with murderous dictators who commit the atrocious human rights violations that we see on a regular basis. So America is not flawless or clean in this story. There's not an American president that has not maintained a relationship with a murderous dictator who commits human rights violations. I want to start with that caveat up front. But Donald Trump is showing us that in his mind, it is okay for us to look at these violations and embrace these people. And I do absolutely draw this from his comment on Andrew Jackson, because how else could Andrew Jackson have avoided the Civil War? You know how he would have done it? By maintaining slavery. There's nothing to fight for if we're not trying to tear down the economic system of slavery. And so likewise, when he talks about inviting Duterte to the White House, when he talks about normalizing or having a conversation with Kim Jong-un and speaking highly of him, it shows you that Donald Trump is willing to go above and beyond the baseline of what America already does. We don't have to absolve America of everything that's done before to actually see what Donald Trump is doing is problematic. It's problematic above and beyond what America has always done. America has always maintained these relationships, but now we've maintained those relationships with the simultaneous criticism of human rights violations. And yeah, I get it. America commits human rights violations. Yeah, I get it. But whenever we do things, we will simultaneously criticize the human rights violations. It doesn't change our relationship with them. We still maintain a relationship with Saudi Arabia, who commits human rights violations every single day. And we presently, through every administration, maintain that relationship. However, there is a difference when your president says, I am okay with what you're doing. I'm okay with Duterte in the Philippines carrying out a war on drugs that literally is killing thousands of people. He is authorizing and sanctioning the murder of drug addicts as well as drug dealers. And Donald Trump is saying to the international community that he's okay with that. Well, it makes sense. And it actually fits in line with this worldview that he has, that we really shouldn't argue with these people and we shouldn't have a civil war, because why did we have it in the first place? You know, Andrew Jackson could have avoided it. The subtext is he would have avoided civil war by maintaining the economic system of slavery. And Donald Trump is okay with that. All right, 857-600-0518. I don't know if I have it in me to talk about all this other stuff. Let's see what else we have. We got a lot of great stories here. We will talk about this. Absolutely, let's talk about this. All right, Jimmy Kimmel. Let's play the footage.
You know, before 2014, if you were born with congenital heart disease like my son was, there was a good chance you'd never be able to get health insurance because you had a pre-existing condition. You were born with a pre-existing condition. If your parents didn't have medical insurance, you might not live long enough to even get denied because of a pre-existing condition. If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't matter how much money you make. I think that's something that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, we all agree on that, right? I mean, we do. And I saw a lot of families there, and no parent should ever have to decide if they can afford to save their child's life. It just shouldn't happen.
Wow.
Not here. So, anyway.
So Jimmy Kimmel, on his show last night, let the world know that his son was born with a heart condition that required immediate surgery. And in telling that story, it was about a 10-minute story. In telling that story, first of all, before we go into the politics of it, I don't know how you could hear stories like this and not be moved to compassion, right? The reality of it is that these types of stories happen every single day. Families have to make these types of decisions, particularly before 2014, when the pre-existing condition component of Obamacare kicked in. Families had to make these types of decisions because they were not able to afford. They were not able to afford to save their children who were born with pre-existing conditions. And I put emphasis here because it's impossible. You have to be less than a human being to be aware of these stories and actively work against people getting the insurance coverage that they need to take care of their families. And maybe it took somebody like Jimmy Kimmel to bring this to light on a national level, but these stories play out every single day in hospitals across the country. And I'm grateful for Jimmy Kimmel doing what he did because that's every parent's nightmare. I mean, just the slightest concern from your wife's OBGYN, your wife's doctor, or the specialist that was just the slightest look of concern causes parents' hearts to drop. And to see in Jimmy Kimmel's eyes that initial concern actually turned out to be a major issue that required open heart surgery on his newborn. How can you be a human being and see this and not be drawn to compassion to do the right thing? To do the right thing. All right, we'll come back to that portion in a second. So Jimmy Kimmel's let the world know that his son was born with a heart condition that required open heart surgery, and then he began to use it to speak on the reality that we need a system that does not allow or does not make parents, does not force them to make a decision or force them into the position where they're not able to take care of it. They can't save their children because they don't have money. And this is the system that Republicans, I genuinely hate that this conversation automatically transitions to politics. But it is a political football being used by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And it's their attempt to remove things like just to repeal Obamacare altogether, with no regard to the people like Jimmy Kimmel. Well, Jimmy Kimmel might have been okay, right? Because he has the money to do what he has to do. But think about the millions of people who don't have any money in their bank whatsoever. Not a dime. And the Republicans' repeal of Obamacare, while Obamacare is not the perfect solution, Obamacare does not fix all of the problems. Obamacare has its own problems, but to repeal it without something better to replace it leaves Americans vulnerable. Thousands of families who face the same exact situation that Jimmy Kimmel's family faced. And so as much as I hate the fact that a compassionate story like this automatically transitions into political commentary, the reality of it is that Republicans have made this political. It is political. It's absolutely about the distribution of our resources and the concern that we have for the least of those amongst us. And so here we are, and you ask yourself the question of how can you see this and not be moved to compassion? And you think for a second, there's no way in the world that somebody could see this and not have a heart and to take a step back and consider. But of course, the Republican Party, conservatives did not disappoint. Here's a tweet from Joe Walsh at Joe Walsh Freedom on Twitter. He says, "Sorry, Jimmy Kimmel, your sad story doesn't obligate me or anybody else to pay somebody else's health care." Let's switch back off real quick. So Joe Walsh, I won't use any profanity because I'm trying not to, just because I'm, but go fuck yourself. That's just on the house. Okay, no, you don't even know how insurance works. You don't care how insurance works. You don't care about how illogical your argument is. All you care is about using this as an opportunity to build your platform with people who actually get off on the same sadistic styled political worldview as you. That's all this is. You don't even care that what you said really undermines your knowledge or exposes the lack of knowledge that you have with regard to insurance, because that's exactly how insurance works, you big idiot. So never mind the lack of compassion, never mind the idiocy. It's just that never mind the lack of compassion. You're an idiot on top of having no compassion. But for every time someone steps out, what's the saying? I know the saying. I just wanted to take a little moment to pause to set it up. Fools jump up to get smacked down. This next tweet from an actress really shows how beautifully Joe Walsh was handled by the universe. Put it up on the screen for me, by Alyssa Milano. She says, don't you owe $117,437 in child support to your ex-wife and 3 children, Joe Walsh? And it's even better when you get owned inside of your own thread. This is a response from David Roth. He said, the laws of your state and this nation obligate you to pay your child support. Chris Pedersen said, Joe, Chris Pedersen said, Joe, you should pay your child support. So what Joe Walsh did this for a measly 1,000 likes, easily, he has gotten owned in the most spectacular way. And does it matter? Probably not in the grand scheme of things, but you can afford me a few moments to be petty. Joe Walsh, go to hell. You guys have a good night.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.